Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. My name is Jeffrey and I'll be your host. Today's topic is Illinois' three capitals that we had here. So I'm just going to go through our first one, second one, and the third one from the order of when they were established. Our first capital in the state was Kaskaskia, and that was established in 1818, since that was the year that we became a state. Where Kaskaskia is located, it was on the banks of the Mississippi River, and it had a value with the trade route since it was right on the riverbank going towards St. Louis. It also had a significant religious and military history as well. When the United States was first being explored, Jesuit missionaries were some of the first people to come to the territory, and they established several trade routes along the way, and Kaskaskia was one of those spots. Militarily, it was near Fort Deschamps, which was influenced by all of the dominant powers in the Americas at the time. It was once controlled by the French, British, and eventually the United States. The Spanish had some influence as well, since they were up in St. Louis, and they explored a lot of the other parts of the western part of the United States. When the capital was first created, the government rented a two-story building for its Capitol building. By 1820, only 2 years later, the state capital was moved to Vandalia. So Kaskaskia was only the capital for a short period of time, but it was down in the significant part of the early years of the state. Since Kaskaskia did lie on the Mississippi, it was subject to the whims of the currents of the Mississippi River. The river changed its course and flooded several times, which wiped away most of the original Kaskaskia settlement. In its current spot, Kaskaskia is considered an island in Illinois. The river cut it from the rest of the state, and it now lies on the western side of the river with Missouri. If you wanted to ever go visit Kaskaskia, you would have to either drive into Missouri from up by St. Louis, or you'll have to drive down to Chester, which is in Randolph County, and then you'll have to cross the Mississippi into Missouri and then go through St. Genevieve to actually get to Kaskaskia. It does have an Illinois zip code, but it's no longer part of the main state of Illinois. There's not too many of the original buildings left because with the river flooding, a lot of those buildings were wiped out. There's a church and another older building that they had moved further back from the riverbanks, but the population of Kaskaskia now doesn't reach more than 100, if I remember right. So now that Kaskaskia is done, we have to move on to Vandalia, and that was the state capital starting in 1820. And they put in the stipulation that it was supposed to remain the capital for a period of 20 years. Its first capital building was a two-story wood structure, and that first one burned down on December 9th, 1823. The second capital building in Vandalia was constructed in the summer of 1824 and cost $15,000. Which that's a significant amount of money in that time, but it was supposed to be for the capital, so I understand why it was kind of a lot of money. But soon after that Capitol building was completed, people in Illinois wanted to move the state capital to a more central location in the state. Where Vandalia is located. It made sense when it was created that it was the state capital because it was on more towards the eastern part of the state where it could link up with people in Indiana, and it wasn't too far from the Kentucky's border. I mean, it was a good jaunt, but it still had a trade route accessible. But people wanted a centralized location for the capital, and they wanted to move it more to the dead center of the state. But since Vandalia was supposed to be the capital for 20 years, that didn't happen right away. The General Assembly passed an act in 1833 allowing the voters to choose a new site for the capital. Alton actually won that voting by a narrow margin, but since it did only win by that small margin, the General Assembly decided not to move the capital to Alton. And if you're not familiar where Alton is, it's on the banks of the Mississippi River, and it's about, I would say, 30 to 45 minutes north of St. Louis via car. But its significant spot is that it's at the mouth of several rivers that come together, so that's why it was a good spot for it to choose as the capital of the state. But unfortunately, they did not get the votes needed to make a convincing case. In February of 1837, the Assembly voted to move the capital to obviously a more central location, and Springfield was chosen. But again, 1837 was not the 20-year marker for Vandalia being chosen as the capital site, so they had to wait a little longer, and Springfield did not become the official capital until December of 1839. If you were to visit Vandalia now, their second state capitol building still stands, and the site hosts several festivals and events throughout the year. The Stephenson House does participate in one of their trades of events where there's a bunch of tradesmen and tradeswomen on the grounds near the Capitol building, and then they demonstrate trades from the period. Moving on to our third capital, which is Springfield. Springfield was chosen as the third capital of the state because it is almost dead center in the middle of the state. And with the state growing in population very fast, they thought Springfield would be a better location than somewhere in the south, since a lot of the population was starting to spread out and move north as well. In July of 1837, the first Capitol building in Springfield started construction. So going back to when the General Assembly chose Springfield, they started the construction on the Capitol building pretty much right away. But it was not completed until 1853 and cost $260,000. Again, for that time period, that's a lot of money, but it's also the Capitol building, so it makes sense why they spent just a little bit more on that building. But the first Capitol building did not actually serve the government for that long. In 1867, an act was passed to construct a new Capitol building. They noticed that the population was growing faster and faster, and they figured that the state Capitol building wouldn't be able to hold the capacity needed soon. So they started to think about having a new Capitol building built. The state government first convened in the new Capitol building in 1876. This remains as the current Capitol building, and its costs reach about $4 million. The original max was about $3 million, but they obviously extended that to $4 million in costs. The exterior of this Capitol building is Niagara limestone, and then it has granite and marble floors. The interior is also covered with paintings, and the building is topped with a dome. If you ever visit the state Capitol building, you'll notice that the architecture is done very well. And then it is home to several paintings from our pioneer and early settlement days, as well as all of the governors who had served prior. And if you're into any Abraham Lincoln stuff, you can see.
So there are a couple things that I find interesting about the Capitol in Springfield. The first being is that underneath the Capitol building, they actually have tunnels where the staff and senators and representatives can all use to access their own office buildings. That way you can keep traffic off the streets and they don't get ambushed by other people wanting to talk to them. Instead, they can actually go from their office to the Capitol building without being bothered by anyone else, and it's probably faster too, instead of going on the street and getting stuck in traffic. Another thing that I find interesting about the Capitol building is that the governor has two offices in the Capitol. The first being his ceremonial office where he signs bills and meets with the press. But then he has a second office that's smaller, and it's more of his private space where he can work when he's not trying to meet with the press or sign bills. And then it's kind of tucked away in a back corner, and it was pretty cool to be able to see both of those offices when I visited the Capitol building a few years back. Not everyone gets to see both of them. And if you're into any Abraham Lincoln stuff, you can see Vandalia still, and he first served at Vandalia, so they have a small claim to their own Lincoln history stuff, and you can see some Lincoln stuff in Vandalia. And then if you go to Springfield to see any of the Capitol buildings or his house, his first law office is right across the street from the first Capitol building in Springfield. So if you're doing a whole historical tour, you can probably nail down a lot of Capitol building stuff and Lincoln stuff as well in a few block radius. Today we do have 3 Capitol buildings that remain. Visitors can visit all 3 of them. Obviously, I have mentioned the one in Vandalia, and then obviously the 2 in Springfield are still standing. All 3 are worth a visit to see more history about each building and who were some of the people who walked its halls and delegated some of its early policy making. If you're a resident of Illinois, when I was younger, I visited Springfield in 7th grade for our class, our history class, and we did all of the cliche things in Springfield. We went to Lincoln's home, and we looked through the state capitol building, and then we went out to New Salem. But it wasn't until I was in college that I actually went to the first Capitol building, and that was kind of fun because I had never been in it, and it's such an important part of the state's history as well. If you want to find more out about each Capitol and its buildings, you can obviously easily do a search on the Illinois website, and the Lincoln Library in Springfield will have articles and primary resources to kind of dig deep into why each Capitol place was chosen. So if you're interested in that or architecture of those buildings, I would definitely check out the Lincoln Library. So that was all that I had for this podcast. I hope you enjoyed just hearing just a bit about the history of our capitals, and we hope to see you next time. Stay safe.